Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, calling for a multilateral mechanism to oversee the peace process with Israel. Speaking at the United Nations Security Council meeting, Abbas, however, said that this was not a rejection of negotiations or a call to violence. He called for the convening of an international peace conference by mid-2018 to negotiate a peace deal. The Palestinian leader blamed the United States' unilateral move to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital for the current deadlock in peace efforts. He also urged the United Nations to recognize the state of Palestine as a full UN member state.
No country alone can solve a regional or international conflict without the participation of other international partners. Therefore, to solve the Palestine question, and this is our position and our belief, it is essential to establish a multilateral international mechanism emanating from an international conference and in line with international law and the relevant resolutions to solve the Palestinian question. A multilateral international mechanism.
And let's get more details, analysis and perspectives now on this from CGTN's Ling Tan. She's joining us from New York, and Adel Mahroui is joining us from Cairo. Ling, let's start off with you though. What more can you tell us about Mahmoud Abbas's speech and what he's seeking from the UN Security Council?
Hey there, Beatrice. Yes, this was an angry and incredulous speech by the Palestinian president. Angry because of the critical juncture that this issue has reached at this point, but incredulous over the decades of a lack of resolution over this political crisis in the Middle East. And President Mahmoud Abbas said that since 1948 there have been 705 resolutions here at the UN, 86 of which were adopted within the Security Council, but there have been no movement and his people continue to suffer. But at the heart of all of this, of course, is the decision by the U.S. administration, by the Trump administration, to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and then move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And that decision had incensed the Palestinians as well as many members of the international community. So President Abbas had lashed out at the U.S. for this, saying that they've met 4 times with the Trump administration in 2017, received no clear indication of the U.S. position on the two-state solution, and instead Trump then made what Abbas described was a dangerous call on Jerusalem. Now, the Palestinian president also lashed out at Israel for its continued settlement activity, saying that it has acted above the law, turning what was a temporary occupation into a permanent colonization. And as you mentioned, Abbas also called to convene an international peace conference in the middle of this year as part of a multilateral peace mechanism, it seems, that would involve less of the U.S. in a leading role in the peace process and more international brokers to help mediate. Beatrice?
Let's bring in Stephanie Fried now she's joining us from Tel Aviv. Stephanie, the Palestinian leader is seeking a multilateral mediation body to resolve the conflict with Israel. Is this a position Israel would support? Any reaction yet?
There hasn't been, there has been a bit of reaction, actually. Certainly, as we probably have heard, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, and I heard one description that he is spitting fire. He's furious about this speech and furious about, we heard in his rebuttal speech, so to speak, what he was furious about, what he had to say. Here in Israel, certainly the reactions are going to come in. We're going to wait and get one definitely from the Prime Minister. It would be, we assume he's definitely going to respond to this. But what we've got so far here is the Education Minister. His name is Naftali Bennett. He sits in the heading the very far right-wing coalition partner in the government. And one of the things that he said, he talked about President Abbas as forgetting his past. And what he said is, a nation that invents its past has no future. And so he's saying that essentially President Abbas, in his speech, was inventing the past for the Palestinians. And his advice, this is Naftali Bennett, stop focusing on building an imaginary past and start looking at start building a practical future. Also a criticism here from the defense minister. He also sits in a very far right-wing party. That's Defense Minister Lieberman. He essentially said that President Abbas pays terrorists with one hand while he uses the other to stretch out to try and appease or look for UN recognition. So those are the two main criticisms. As well, the defense minister called President Abbas a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And we're expecting certainly more commentary, more criticism from Israeli leaders who will not be happy whatsoever about this speech at the UN.
Right, Adel Mahrouri in Cairo, though. Adel, you've heard the reaction there from Israel on Mahmoud Abbas's speech at the UN Security Council. Now, the League of Arab States is a big supporter of Palestine. Does the group support the proposal for a multilateral mediation body?
This is what the Arab League believes should be the way on forward, and this is what the President Mahmoud Abbas has been stressing. It seems from his speech that there was a complete coherence between what President Abbas has said and all the previous positions and the later emergency resolutions or the outcomes of the emergency meetings in Cairo responding or to investigate Trump's Jerusalem decision. There's all the same pattern, and this is what President Abbas has been stressing on when he mentioned the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative to normalize ties in return for peace. He stressed that this initiative remains as the foundation of creating peace in the region that has been supported by Arab leaders. And he also stressed that this peace initiative should be taken within order, meaning that there will be no normalizing ties with Israel unless peace is achieved first, not the other way. He was referring to a lot of talks about several Arab countries and Gulf countries as well who have been trying to or opening communication with the Israelis for the first time. So it seems that the President, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, is not just talking or trying to remind the Security Council about its previous resolutions for the two-state solution, but he's also refreshing the minds, even for the Arab world, about their previous positions, and says that this is the only way forward.
Well, Liling, what kind of response has this proposal drawn from the members of the UN Security Council, though?
From the Security Council itself, there hasn't been very clear, definitive response to this proposed multilateral mechanism, but I think a good gauge of where sentiment is within the Council is that what's telling is right after President Mahmoud Abbas concluded his remarks, there was thundering applause throughout the Security Council chamber. It's hard to tell which delegations were applauding the speech and what specifically they were applauding. But remember that the United Nations is a multilateral organization, and if a multilateral mechanism over the Middle East peace process can get the parties from point A to point B, then conceivably this is not something that they would not support. And in fact, we are seeing Security Council members making very clear, most of them at least, backing the two-state solution. So right now it depends, a lot of eyes are on the specifics of this proposed multilateral mechanism in order to bring as a means to resolve this very long-standing and long-running conflict.
Well, Stephanie, the Palestinian leader is also seeking for full recognition and membership of the Palestinian state at the United Nations as opposed to its current observer status. So what's Israel's position on this matter?
Well, certainly Israel, again, is not happy in terms of this proposal. And for a number of reasons. The proposal is a product, if you look at history, but in the most recent history, I mean, this speech and this idea of a conference mid-2018, International Peace Conference, recognition of a Palestinian state, that's coming because of the immediate history of the declaration of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And in a sense, Mahmoud Abbas was pushed into a corner, that's how it's perceived on many levels, where he didn't have much room to move, especially after saying that the United States is no longer a mediator between the two sides because the U.S. is no longer neutral. Mahmoud Abbas has been traveling, meeting with leaders, pushing this idea behind the scenes as recently as a week ago in Moscow with Vladimir Putin. Israel's not happy about it because as well that declaration comes with it a certain, if you will, indebtedness, a debt. And Israel sees the United States as the peacemaker between the sides. So does the United States. This is bypassing the process, but in a sense, again, what they're saying here, some critics in terms of the Israeli government and how the Israeli government has maneuvered, it's playing Israel at its own game, and that's what I've heard from several people, analysts that I've spoken with.
Right, Adele, a final comment from you though, because Egypt has over the years played the mediator role at critical moments in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Is there a sense that Egypt has a role in helping to bridge the gap during the prevailing deadlock?
Egypt has already been trying to do so. When the Palestinian president refused to meet Vice President Pence when he was in the region, President El-Sisi was very keen, despite several rescheduling of this meeting, to meet Pence and discuss that issue in specific. Also, when the Secretary of State Tillerson was here in Cairo a few days ago, the Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry seemed to be in complete coherence, and both of them during the press conference have stressed more than once that they're working together and they are more or less on the same page when it comes to the Palestinian rights and the Palestinian crisis. It's the methodology of the process and what comes before what. This remains the big point of differences, to freeze the settlements before starting the peace talks as the Palestinians want, or to disarm the armed wings or the groups like Hamas in Gaza first, as Israel wants. So these are the main points that have to be resolved, and this is what Egypt actually has been trying to take a significant lead at. Especially in recent months, when Egypt opened a new page, it started to revive its talks with Hamas to get more control and use the Rafah border as a leverage for Cairo over the Gaza Strip. And so far it seems to be working. We've seen Hamas for the first time, because of Egyptian mediation efforts, announcing that it will take a step back and join a unified government. There are, of course, the long in that process is still long, but Cairo seems to be influential enough to take that leading role and try to bring sides closer, their views closer together. And it is the plan of President El-Sisi, who strongly believes that the Palestinian crisis is the core reason for all the instability in the Middle East. And to Egypt, it's a matter of national security. And from the President El-Sisi's perspective, if the Palestinian crisis is resolved, the entire region, all the crises that follows in Libya, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, they will all fade away from his point of view. And therefore, that's why Egypt has been taking a very strong approach and trying to prioritize the Palestinian crisis before all other issues in the Middle East, so that there will be finally, if that deal manages to see the light, if peace talks manage to go through, Egypt believes that this is the key factor to bring stability back to the region.
All right, Adel Mahroui for us there in Cairo, Stephanie Fred in Tel Aviv, and Lilington in New York. To you all, thank you.